Ships are on fire. Commercial tankers, carrying oil that heats homes, fuels factories, and keeps economies alive, struck by Iranian missiles and drones in the Strait of Hormuz. And the United States Navy just ordered an entire carrier strike group to the region at full speed. This is not a drill. This is not a warning shot. This is the opening move of a crisis that could reshape the global economy overnight. And most people have no idea how close to the edge we actually are. I'm going to break down exactly what's happening, why it matters more than almost any story you've seen this week, and, most importantly, what comes next. Stay with me. This one is important. Before we get into what's happening militarily, you need to understand what the Strait of Hormuz actually is. Because this is not just a military story, it is an economic weapon. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow stretch of water, just 21 miles wide at its tightest point, connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. It doesn't look like much on a map, but through that 21-mile gap flows approximately 20% of all the world's oil. Every single day, roughly 17 to 21 million barrels pass through, loaded onto supertankers heading to Japan, China, India, South Korea, and Europe. Japan gets nearly 90% of its oil through Hormuz. South Korea, over 70%. India, more than 60%. These are the engines of the global economy, and they all depend on this one narrow passage. Now ask yourself, what happens to the price of oil if that passage closes? During past Hormuz scares, 2019, 2011, oil prices spiked 10 to 30% within days. A full closure? Some analysts project oil hitting $150, maybe $200 a barrel. That's not inflation. That's a global recession trigger. So when Iran starts hitting ships in the Strait, they're not just attacking ships. They're holding the global economy hostage, and now the United States is responding. Let's walk through what has actually happened, step by step. It began with Iranian Shahed drones and anti-ship missiles targeting commercial tankers and cargo vessels transiting the strait. Not military ships, commercial shipping, oil tankers, cargo carriers, the arteries of world trade. The strikes were deliberate and coordinated. Iran's message was clear: the strait is no longer safe for your ships. With Iran's leadership digging in, doubling down on their stance, the situation wasn't de-escalating, it was building. The United States responded by striking Iranian forces caught in the act of mine-laying, attempting to seed the strait with naval mines that could devastate commercial and military shipping alike. And then came the decision that made this a full crisis. The U.S. Navy directed an entire carrier strike group, aircraft carriers, cruiser escorts, destroyers, the full package, to steam at maximum speed toward the Strait of Hormuz. On board those ships, combat preparations began immediately. FA-18 Super Hornets armed and launched, Tomahawk cruise missiles brought to readiness, Stinger anti-aircraft teams deployed to the upper decks. The Phalanx CIWS, the last line of defense against incoming drones, powered up and tracking. This was not a show of force for the cameras. This was a war footing. And below decks, ordnance crews were already cycling 2,000-pound guided bombs up from the magazines toward the flight deck, ready to mount on fighters pointed at Iranian military targets on the coast and inland. The fleet is now in position. And the question every analyst, every admiral, and every government dependent on Hormuz oil is asking is this: can the U.S. Navy actually keep the strait open? On paper, this looks like a mismatch. The United States Navy is the most powerful maritime force in human history. Aircraft carriers, guided missile cruisers, submarines, the full nuclear conventional package. Iran knows this. They're not trying to fight the U.S. Navy head-to-head. They never were. What Iran has developed over decades is something far more dangerous in a constrained waterway: asymmetric warfare. Here's Iran's playbook. Swarms of cheap Shahed drones, costing a few $1,000s each, launched in waves to overwhelm ship defenses. Fast attack boats, dozens of them, moving at high speed in coordinated swarms. Shore-based anti-ship missiles positioned along the Iranian coast with overlapping coverage of the entire strait. And naval mines, the great equalizer, seeded across the shipping lanes in the dark. Each of these individually is manageable. All of them simultaneously in a 21-mile-wide choke point? That's a different problem. Mines are the biggest wild card. Once a mine is in the water, it doesn't care how big your aircraft carrier is. The USS Samuel B. Roberts nearly sank from a single mine in 1988. A carrier strike group can project enormous firepower, but it can't sweep mines while it's also flying combat missions and defending against drone swarms. The US can absolutely degrade Iran's ability to threaten the strait. Airstrikes on drone bases, on shore-based missile sites, on mine-laying vessels, all within the capability of the forces now in theater. But degrade and eliminate are two very different words. And in the hours and days between strikes, ships are still vulnerable. The honest assessment, the US can keep the strait open for military traffic, keeping it fully safe for commercial shipping against a determined Iranian asymmetric campaign is a harder problem, one that hasn't been fully solved. Let's play this out. 3 scenarios, and I want you to understand the economic and geopolitical weight behind each one. Scenario 1, partial disruption. Iran harasses shipping without fully closing the strait. Tanker captains start avoiding the route. Insurance rates for ships entering the Gulf go through the roof. Some already have. Shipping companies reroute around Africa, adding weeks and massive cost. Oil spikes 30 to 40%. Global inflation ticks up. Recession risk rises. This is where we are right now, edging toward this scenario. Scenario 2, full closure. Iran succeeds in making the strait impassable, even temporarily. The global oil price shock would be immediate and severe. Markets in Tokyo, Seoul, Mumbai, Frankfurt go into freefall. Governments that depend on HORMUZ oil start making emergency decisions. Strategic petroleum reserves get tapped. Rationing discussions begin. This scenario, even lasting a few weeks, triggers a global recession. The last time something came close to this was 1973. It reshaped the entire world economy. Scenario 3, US succeeds. Iran isolated. The US carrier group suppresses Iranian threats decisively. Airstrikes neutralize drone and missile infrastructure. The strait reopens fully. Commercial shipping resumes. Oil prices stabilize. Iran, having failed to close the strait and having absorbed significant military damage, faces an international community united in condemnation. Saudi Arabia and Gulf states, watching from the sidelines, quietly coordinate with the US. Iran is isolated, militarily, economically, diplomatically. Which scenario plays out depends entirely on decisions being made right now. In Tehran, in Washington, and in every capital city that depends on that 21-mile stretch of water. Zoom out for a moment, because this crisis isn't just about ships and oil. It's about what Iran is doing strategically, and whether it's working. Iran's leadership is in a defining moment, with pressure mounting from inside the country, with the economy under severe sanctions, and with regional rivals like Saudi Arabia and Israel watching closely. This is a regime that needs to project strength. Closing the strait, or threatening to, is the most powerful economic leverage Iran has. It's their trump card. But here's the calculation Tehran is making. Can they inflict enough economic pain on the West and on Asian powers to force a negotiation without triggering a military response so severe that it sets their defense infrastructure back decades? That's the knife's edge they're walking. And it's the same knife's edge the United States is walking on the other side. Because here's the strategic truth that doesn't get enough attention. U.S. deterrence credibility is on the line. If Iran successfully disrupts global shipping through the strait, even partially, and the U.S. response is seen as insufficient, every adversary on the planet takes note. China watches. Russia watches. North Korea watches. Conversely, a decisive U.S. response that reopens the strait and degrades Iran's military capability sends a different message, one that reinforces American deterrence across every theater. The Strait of Hormuz is not just an energy choke point. Right now, it's a test. A test of whether American military power can still deter this kind of coercion, and the outcome of that test will echo far beyond the Persian Gulf. That's the picture. Ships struck, fleets deployed, the global economy hanging in the balance of a 21-mile choke point. So here's the question I want to leave you with. Is Iran's closure threat real, or is it a bluff? Drop your take in the comments. I read everyone. If this breakdown was useful, subscribe. We do this kind of deep dive analysis every week. No noise, no spin. Just the strategic picture, clearly explained. I'll see you in the next one.